I'm going to start today by asking you all a question. Is a fossil a unique and irreplaceable piece of Earth's natural history? Or is it a status symbol, a luxury item to be acquired? That question came to my mind recently when I was told that a T-Rex skeleton was going up for auction from private ownership. And it got me wondering, what kind of price tag does an item like that carry? And is it right for it to carry a price tag at all? Imagine for a second the absurdity of it. A predator that lived 67 million years ago, before laws and borders, or money, or even people, stood bolted together in the pristine halls of an auction house, being bid on for sums of money beyond what most of us will ever earn in our lifetimes. Absurd that might be, but it's about to happen. An articulated Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton called Gus, discovered in the Hell Creek Formation and dating from the Maastrichtian era about 67 million years ago, just before dinosaurs went extinct, has gone up for auction listed on Sotheby's website, listed at between $20 and $30 million. A sum of money that is unimaginable to people like you and me, but mere pocket change for some people living in the age of the world's first trillionaire. Make no mistake, this is big business. A Triceratops called Big John, thought to be one of the biggest of his kind ever discovered to date, sold at auction in 2021 for 7.7 million US dollars. But even that is small fry. In 2024, a Stegosaurus called Apex, the largest and probably one of the most complete of its kind ever discovered, broke the world record as the most expensive fossil ever sold, getting $44.6 million at auction, breaking the previous record set just a few years earlier in 2020 by a different T-Rex called Stan, which went for a measly, trifling $31.8 million. Dinosaurs are the new status symbol, the new Lamborghini, an up-and-coming contender for the spot of the hunting trophy or the original Rembrandt painting. And maybe most disgustingly of all, they seem to be becoming the new investment asset. The commercial trade in fossils is enormous, involving hundreds of thousands of people around the world. And there has always been a trade in fossil materials. One of history's most famous fossil hunters, Mary Anning, was a commercial fossil hunter, selling her finds to support her family. And many scientists of that day, like Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, and for example Sir Richard Owen, all did have their own private collections. The difference is that those collections were embedded in the scientific community of their day and used for study. And beyond that, it was common for when those people died, their collections would go back to public hands. For example, lots of Darwin's collections are now spread across museums across the UK and the wider world. What's new here is the scale and price tag and luxury item branding of scientifically significant specimens. We live in an age where public museums and academic institutions are in competition with millionaires and hedge funds to acquire these materials. We live in the day of a for-profit industry built around the commercial dealing of scientifically important fossils. So far, we've talked about these kinds of historical artifacts solely through the lens of money, but there are other ways that we might choose to think about it. I'm thinking of calling this video something like, "Can you put a price tag on history?" And I imagine that lots of you are probably having a similar thought. Something like Gus the T-Rex is worth more than simple money to science. When we're talking about worth and value in this sort of context, I think there are three major things that we need to consider: monetary value, knowledge value, and cultural value. Essentially, how much wealth is someone willing to trade for it, how much can be learned from it, and how much does it mean to the cultural heritage of a group of people. However, we more or less live in a world of laws, and legal rights of ownership might apply for a huge range of reasons beyond just these three sources of value. Many would argue that Gus is the legal property of whoever owns the land he was excavated from, whether that be an individual or an indigenous group or even the nation state. For example, in the USA specifically, there is a large difference between what happens to fines from private versus federally owned lands. Depending on circumstances, there might also be legal claims by the people who did the discovering and the excavating. That's how lots of specimens end up in museums now, by the researchers having the rights and proper permits to take what they find back to their academic institutions for research and public education. I'd be okay if that situation was always the case. But of course, I'm biased. I'm a scientist, first and foremost, and my research has depended on museum collections for gathering data. It's only natural that I believe that any and all objects like that belong in some sort of centralized, publicly owned venue for study and education and stewardship. The Society of Vertebrate Paleontology have a line in their ethics statement that I entirely agree with. Scientifically significant fossil vertebrate specimens, along with ancillary data, should be curated and accessioned in the collections of repositories charged in perpetuity with conserving fossil vertebrates for scientific study and education. In short,
it belongs in a museum!
But plainly, private collections do exist, so not everyone agrees with me. There are some cases, like this privately owned specimen of Archaeopteryx, listed by the German government as a piece of cultural property of national significance that was made available for scientific study. But that is by no means the rule. This issue also gets even more thorny when we consider the British Museum of it all. Even if we do collectively agree that these things belong in museums, which museum do they belong in? There's been lots and lots of tension over the years about fossils being taken and housed overseas. The country of provenance often claims a legal right of ownership over fossils found within their borders. And things can get quite heated, given, the history of colonial extraction and exploitation and cultural appropriation. The question I have for you here, and I don't have a clear answer myself, is does a country have any more right of ownership over a fossil than any other country or any individual does? Sometimes, in the legal sense, it can be very clear, but I mean more from the moral perspective. Archaeological artifacts, and especially human remains, are a very different thing, and I want to make that very, very clear. They speak to the history and cultural heritage of a group of people, and so national public ownership by that group of people makes a lot of sense. But a geological artifact, like a dinosaur fossil, was formed long before humanity even existed as a species, let alone whichever nation drew its borders over the rock that fossil formed in. Depending where you're from and your political leanings, you might think that land ownership is the definitive legal right, but I'm not so sure. What right does any individual person or select group of people have to claim ownership over something that exists separated from humanity and our heritage, a piece of ancient memory belonging to the Earth itself? Fossils don't have descendants in the same way that more recent human remains and man-made artifacts do. And I know it's more complicated than that. These items are found in places with people and communities, with laws and their own histories in that place. So maybe the question I should be asking you isn't whether anybody has a claim. Maybe it should be whether ownership is the right kind of claim. This talk of repatriation and moral ownership seems to be the clearest crossing of our three axes of worth. Some say that it belongs to them, either legally or morally, or both, while others say that no, it should stay with them because it's best preserved and cared for in their stewardship, while others still, undoubtedly, seek to profit from whichever outcome emerges. And to be very clear, I'm not saying that repatriation of stolen items shouldn't happen, especially when they are cultural artifacts or human remains. I just think that fossils are a separate category of object that exist outside of cultural ownership and national identity. Am I going to get slaughtered in the comments for saying that? Anyway, I think I've made my point as clearly as I can, so maybe we should take this opportunity to move on from discussions of ownership. There is another thing to consider. How many of the fossils now known out there in the world are only being discovered because of commercial fossil hunting? Paleontology isn't a particularly well-funded branch of science, so is private money doing a lot of work in facilitating the expeditions to go out there and do the discovering? The answer is undoubtedly yes. I already mentioned Mary Anning, without whom displays like this, housed at the Natural History Museum in London, simply wouldn't exist. It's really hard to try and put a number on the number of species and specimens that she discovered across her career, but she made at least 3 truly groundbreaking discoveries. The first complete ichthyosaur to ever gain proper scientific attention, the first ever complete plesiosaur, and also the first ever pterosaur to be discovered outside of Germany. However, despite this raw potential for discovery, we do risk losing other important things. Do you remember this from earlier? A fossil is most useful to scientists if we know exactly where it came from, the exact location, the exact layer of rock it was dug out of, and the exact combination of other things found in the rock around it. Together, these give context and tell us about the biology of the extinct animal. This is why all modern paleontology papers have extensive sections and diagrams explicitly stating where the fossil was found and what was going on around them geologically and in terms of contemporary biodiversity. A single fossil of unknown provenance, no matter how well preserved, can only tell us so much. We need that all-important context to actually teach us meaningful things about the history and processes of life on Earth. And that can very easily get lost when untrained or uninterested people are going out there and doing the finding. Their interests are likely in money, not in data. Maybe that's another point to make quickly. Lots of the people who go out and do this rely on the proceeds to support their families. Particularly in places like Morocco comes to mind. You find lots of people who rely on the sales of fossil finds to tourists and collectors to support their families, much as Mary Anning did 2 centuries ago. I'm not trying to say that everybody involved in this is pure evil or anything so black and white. It's more how the world we live in can exploit anything for profit and the aggrandizement of the billionaire that makes me really quite angry. Hopefully I've made my stance clear. I don't like this. I don't like that invaluable pieces of the Earth's history can be lost from science's eye into the hands of the obscenely wealthy. The notion of owning something like that just doesn't sit right with me. Although I do acknowledge that there are often complicated histories and heated politics surrounding the issue in some cases. Despite the complexities and nuances, I still find this all immensely dirty. And I'm going to sort of start wrapping up with a quote from Professor Richard Butler, a paleontologist at the University of Birmingham. Any research on private specimens could also be used to increase the fossil's apparent value for future sales, which goes against what many paleontologists believe in. It certainly goes against what I believe in. The idea of leveraging scientific access to unique materials to jack up the price of an investment asset is just gross to me. And it is reasonable that common fossils could go to private ownership once academic and educational institutions have thousands of them already. But for completely unique and significant pieces, for example, the largest and most complete Stegosaurus ever discovered, should not. At the very least, there should maybe be some sort of legal restriction in place, guaranteeing permanent access for free scientific study. I'm sure you have thoughts, so please, let them be known. Do you agree or disagree with me? In either case, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.